Woo, how lucky am I? All right, let's go. We're starting with some of the biggest contract questions hanging over the league right now. Still no deal for Brock Purdy in San Francisco. But there is reason for hope, according to general manager John Lynch.
I can tell you, we've made it a practice not to talk about negotiations, and that goes way back to when I was playing. I felt like that was my business, and I didn't want the world knowing it. So I've always been very sensitive to that.
Yeah.
But what I can tell you is we're having really good, positive discussions. When it gets done, I'm not sure. Hope sooner rather than later, but hope is not a strategy. So we're making progress. We've had good discussions.
Jeff, it's been a hot minute. Where are we with this situation?
The company line, and perhaps rightfully so, from John Lynch all along. He knows that some of his contract negotiations in the past with other players have gone a little sideways, maybe just in terms of how long they took to get done. This time around, he wants this to get done sooner. A lot of times we don't see these big quarterback discussions get done until midsummer. I actually anticipate this getting done sooner. If they could get it finished by the end of May, when OTAs really kick into gear, that would be obviously very ideal.
And Jeff, it doesn't seem like they're not aligned in terms of what the value is. It seems like the Niners know that they're going to have to pay him a whole bunch of money. He's been the best bargain in the NFL for the last 3 years probably. And so I think when you look at it, and some people, are going to, maybe shudder a little bit when they hear it. But Brock Purdy's going to be making over $50 million a year. That's just going to happen. He's going to deserve it. I think the Niners know it. I think Purdy knows it. And ultimately, I think we end up, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, there have been 11 contracts worth an average of at least $50 million a year in NFL history, and all of them are quarterbacks. Meanwhile, to Dallas, the big question is Micah Parsons and a potential long-term deal there. So what do we know there, Jeff?
Well, looking for a record-breaking extension here, and while we have certainly called things positive when it comes to Jerry Jones' talks about these, I would not classify them quite the same as we did with Brock Purdy. Rather, this feels like it'll continue to be complicated. Jerry Jones making comments like he'd rather pay more if it takes longer and get it right than pay less. We don't really know what any of that means. We just know that Micah Parsons wants to get paid, and quite frankly, I don't see him at this point taking any type of hometown discount.
Yeah, Jeff, I agree. It's complicated just because they want to wait and string it along so we talk about it every day. But it's really not complicated in the grand scheme of things. They're going to make Micah Parsons the highest paid defensive player in the league. They're going to have to redo some of these contracts that they have on the books. People will get money up front. But in order for 11 to get what he wants, he's going to have to be the highest paid defender in the league. And I fully expect Jerry Jones and Steven to take it day one of the new season.
Which would mean a lot of money because Myles Garrett became the first defensive player to make $40 million a year this offseason. Typical Cowboys, they wait and the price goes up. All right, the Steelers say they're comfortable with Mason Rudolph, but what about the Aaron Rodgers of it all, Jeff? What the heck? What's going on?
Well, you know what? Another offseason, and here we are talking about a 49ers player, a Cowboys player, and Aaron Rodgers and what he will do in the offseason. Now, it still remains potentially hopeful that he will wind up playing with the Steelers. They obviously are trying to move forward with Mason Rudolph, at least the messaging that he can be their starting quarterback. But there is a reason why this team did not make any dramatic moves in the draft, and it is because they still are holding out hope that Rodgers will be their quarterback. If it happens, fine. If it doesn't, it looks like it will be Mason Rudolph under center week one.
Yeah, and I just think you follow what's happened there. Like Aaron Rodgers has gone to Pittsburgh. He's met with Mike Tomlin. He's put cleats on and decided to throw routes to DK Metcalf. Like typically guys that are older than 40 years old don't put cleats on and go throw to receivers that are active in the NFL. Like I have full anticipation that Aaron Rodgers ends up in Pittsburgh because I think he still wants to play. And he's also Pittsburgh's best option at the position at this point.
Yeah, last year was his second career season QBR under 50. So if and when, we'll see what he brings to the table there. On to Cincinnati, Trey Hendrickson requested a trade from the Bengals back in March. No movement there that we're hearing about, Jeff. What can you tell us about his future there in Cincy?
You know, no movement, but this is another one of those things. With the Bengals, all of a sudden we hear nothing, and then they sign their 2 top wide receivers to long-term deals. I will say with Trey Hendrickson, they're trying to get this back on the rails, so to speak. It has been frustrating, to say the least, to Trey Hendrickson since this point, but it is a situation where he wants to be paid coming off of a season like he had. And quite frankly, I don't think that the team is giving up hope here. I just think that after they paid those wide receivers, it becomes much more difficult to pay Hendrickson as well.
Yeah, Jeff, I agree with you. It's going to be super interesting. The T. Higgins deal is really the one that made this very difficult for Trey Hendrickson. We didn't know if T. Higgins was going to get the type of money he got. We knew Jamar Chase would. But when you look at Trey and his production, there should be teams that come into the fold with a potential trade option and pay him. Highly productive sack leader from last year. Trey should get a lot of attention when the time is right. Cincinnati, I'm not sure if they're going to be able to afford what he's asking for on a yearly salary.
Yeah, T.J. Watt and Myles Garrett, the only players with more sacks than him over the last 5 seasons. Okay, and now the Dolphins' Tyreek Hill. So he was asked to name his top 5 quarterbacks in the NFL, and while 4 of them were really fairly obvious, let's face it, the 5th one was a much different Florida quarterback than you might have expected. Take a listen.
Said, could I rank my top 5 quarterbacks? Lamar, Josh, Pat, obviously. No, this is no order, by the way. Baker Mayfield, and Joe Shiesty, too.
I mean, yeah. Swagoo, what do you think of no Tua there? What do you think? I mean, Baker Mayfield over Tua is essentially what we're talking about here.
Yeah, listen, the honesty of Tyreek Hill, he knew damn well not to put Tua in there, or we would have had a conversation about Tua not being a top 5 quarterback. One, he saves the conversation so Tua don't have to hear it. And then secondly, he talks about Baker Mayfield in Florida. Now, I don't know how him and Tua are going to have this discussion, but when he mentioned all of the guys, it's the regular guys, and he threw Baker Mayfield in there because he knew in May on NFL Live at 4 p.m., we would talk about this. So Tyreek is, a little bit, he's been known to say things that strikes an eye. Because when he got to Miami, I want to remind everybody that he said Tua was a better thrower of the football and more precise than Patrick Mahomes.
Exactly.
So take it with a grain of salt. And don't make it personal to it. He's just saving you a conversation.
Okay, so it's just Tyreek being Tyreek when he also said right when the season was over, Jeff, and you were there, I want out of here. I want out of Miami. So what's going on with him in that regard?
Tyreek being Tyreek is getting a little bit tiresome, I think, to some people. Now, I'm not saying that we should make a huge deal out of this. I was sort of waiting for the caveat of, well, no, I'm not going to include my own quarterback here. I didn't hear it. Maybe it was suggested in some capacity elsewhere. But this is another situation where I think that this team wants to get rid of distractions, and they want Tyreek Hill to be the teammate that he was when he talked glowingly about Tua and the comparison that you just made, that he made to Patrick Mahomes, where people sort of raised their eyebrows and said, there's no way you actually mean that. And now we want to look at him and say essentially, there's no way you actually mean this. Listen, if Tyreek Hill does want out of Miami, as suggested earlier this season, which he then walked back, he is doing himself no favors, because all that he's doing is sending messages to potential suitors that this is how he's going to act at some point in time when he plays for them. I will say the Dolphins still believe he is incredibly talented and warrants the type of respect that they give him. But man, it's got to get tiresome at some point.
Yeah, listen, Tyreek Hill's an amazing receiver, and there have been a lot of amazing receivers that have become headaches. Like, that's what's happened. And look, it's been going on for decades, so it's really nothing new. And I think Marcus's assessment, of the situation in terms of, look, anytime a star player talks, it generates a conversation. So he's in it, he's in the top 5. We're talking, is he really? And you're defending it. If he's not, then you're talking about that. Is Joe Flacco elite because he answered in a conversation whether he thinks he's an elite quarterback? I think the moral of the story kind of on it with these is, the more outlandish things guys say, the more they do get tuned out. Like that does happen. The other thing is that that, look, when you're a player, you can't talk the same as if you do when you're an analyst or a former player. You can't, because you're in a locker room, and what you say has ramifications that quite honestly it doesn't when you don't work for that organization and you work for ESPN. So that's the reality of how it works.
Yeah. Tim, I love that fact, because I like when we going through the season and we talk to fans, and I always had a conversation. I have no allegiance to your team. I'm looking and watching and telling the truth about it. To your point, it's different when a player from the team says it, because you have an allegiance, and there is a respectability that lies within that locker room when you play with guys that are next to you to talk about them. And if you don't have nothing good to say, don't say anything at all. And please remove Baker Mayfield from that and put Jalen Hurts in there.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, you don't just you replace him with Baker Mayfield. Okay, it's playing right down the road. Okay, thanks, guys. That was a lot of fun. Travis Hunter trading up to number 2 in the draft to grab the two-way Colorado star who begins his rookie mini